I give the floor to Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun, please.
Okay, good, thank you. Well, it's a bit hard to speak after almost every speaker covered the topics that I wanted to touch, and you did it very well, much better than I would do. That's why let me try a bit different approach to the topic that we are discussing. Actually, there are many hermeneutical ways to deal with the Ukrainian issue, or more narrowly with the issue of the Ukrainian church. I would suggest to approach this issue from the perspective of recognition of reality. Well, we could interpret the winners and the losers in this situation, the situation related to the Ukrainian church, in terms of succeeding or failing to recognize the realities that we in Ukraine face. Primarily, it is the reality of war. It has been mentioned already that it was mentioned very clearly, particularly by Ambassador Herbst, that it is not a civil war. It is a real war between Russia and Ukraine. And this is a harsh reality that we face on the everyday basis. I myself had a chance to visit the front line just a couple of months ago. And it was a kind of an astonishing experience, an experience of real war, real conflict. We were driving across the minefields, the crossfire of snipers, and we were exposed to the risks of being shot by snipers and by the Russian artillery. It's an everyday experience for those people who live there. Of course, some of them, they enjoy this kind of experience. Like this experience makes them high somehow. But still, it is a war. And exactly this reality of war, of conflict, of bloodshed, of lost lives is at the core of the issue that we are discussing here. Because the failure of the Russian Church to give a solution to the Ukrainian issue, to the Ukrainian ecclesial issue, and the failure of my own church, which is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church under the Moscow Patriarchate, to recognize the reality of the war, made them failing the Ukrainian people. That's exactly why they are not heard anymore, why they are not respected anymore, as they used to be respected. They're either silence or endorsement to the war contributed to a dramatic fall of their reputation in the Ukrainian society among the Ukrainian people. Even among their own flocks, the people who belong to those churches, they were diverted from those churches eventually as a result of this silence, of this corroboration and collaboration, sometimes very open collaboration with the aggressor. I would explain the decrease of popularity of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine by this failure to recognize the reality of the war. And the only church in the Orthodox ecumene that has recognized this reality, that has faced this reality, and has consoled the Ukrainian people about this reality is the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And that was exactly the winning point for the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It received a tremendous support among the Ukrainian people, even though who in Ukraine knew about the Ecumenical Patriarchate before that? Well, only a bunch of people, a very kind of tiny group of people knew more or less about the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Now, many in Ukraine, the Ukrainian society, even secular people would know words like autocephaly, Thomas, and would know the personality of Patriarch Bartholomew. And the support towards the Ecumenical Patriarchate is tremendous. And one of the main reasons, I would say, why this support has emerged is the fact that the Ecumenical Patriarchate has recognized the tragedy of the Ukrainian people, the war, the conflict. It doesn't call it, civil war. It doesn't call it with all those euphemisms that were invented by the Russian propaganda and that have become a part of the Russian narrative. Well, I should say properly that this recognition of the war is not as clear-cut as probably by, for instance, the U.S. government. or by the international institutions, but still it is there. It is at least something, because we didn't receive any support from any other church whatsoever. The only decision of an Orthodox church related to the Ukrainian situation, in my memory, is a decision. It was a petition from the Holy Synod of the Greek Orthodox Church, which was made, I think, in summer 2015, when the Greek Orthodox Church petitioned the Archbishop of Athens to ask Mr. Putin to lift embargo on Greek olives. That is the only church-issued document related to the Ukrainian conflict, to my knowledge. Against this background, I mean, the decision of the Ecumenical Patriarchate is tremendously important, and it has been appreciated very much by the Ukrainian people. So those who failed to acknowledge the reality of violence, the reality of humanitarian catastrophe, the reality of the war in Ukraine, those churches and people and groups failed Ukraine. Those who have recognized that, they won Ukrainian hearts, I would say. And here is, I think, that strength of the U.S. position, if I'm allowed to, to reflect on the political position of the U.S., because we had such clear statements from the United States about the war, and no other country would made it more clear. That is the reason. That is also the reason why people in Ukraine are really on the side there. I think most of them are friends nowadays of the United States. So the recognition of trauma, the recognition of sufferings, it is important, and it has played a crucial role in the entire Ukrainian issue, in the issue of the Ukrainian autocephaly. And I believe this recognition is also a way towards peace and reconciliation. It's not just about winning and losing, it's also about making peace in Ukraine. I believe that if we apply to Ukraine the general description of the Truth and Reconciliation process, the famous process that has affected many countries, which were torn and tormented by divisions, like South Africa, like Canada, like countries of the Eastern Europe. Truth constitutes the first step towards reconciliation. You cannot you cannot reach reconciliation without telling truth about what has happened. First, the truth should be acknowledged. Then, the Christian forgiveness should be applied as a next step. But you cannot apply forgiveness without, telling what has happened, without revealing what has happened. And that is exactly what we are talking about through the process of granting autocephaly to the Ukrainian Church. Some important truths have been told by the Ecumenical Patriarchate, by the churches, and this exactly paved a way towards reconciliation, quite surprisingly. That's why I believe the way towards autocephaly of the Ukrainian Church is also a way towards reconciliation in Ukraine and of Ukraine with other countries. I could imagine that let us imagine that Russia has recognized its crimes, that would be the first step towards reconciliation with the country. We are not against Russia eternally. We don't want, to be at war with Russia for centuries. We want to reconcile with that country, but that country first has to recognize what it has done. And that's why I want to stress this. The process of granting autocephaly to the Ukrainian Church is connected with the process of peace and reconciliation in Ukraine. That is the most important point that I wanted to raise. Another point, which is a bit different from what I've said, is about the way how this process affects the religious communities. It has been said in many discussions that this is a political process, and indeed it is a political process. This process of granting autocephaly to the Ukrainian Church has become a part of the political agenda, so the political discourse and so forth. But it remains for the people of the Church. It remains a pastoral issue primarily. And what the Ecumenical Patriarchate has done was to address the pastoral issue, which remained pending. No other church wanted to touch on this issue. No other church wanted to give a pastoral solution to the problem that tormented many people. For many people, for millions of people, I would say, it was an issue of consciousness. They realized that they belong to non-recognized groups. I don't want to call them schismatic groups, to non-recognized groups. For some, it was not a problem. For some, it was a problem. And they didn't have any other alternative where to go, any other canonical alternative where to go, or legitimate alternative. And this was an issue, a pastoral and an issue of consciousness, an issue of freedom of consciousness, if you want. The very issue of the schism in the Ukrainian Church is an issue of freedom of consciousness, because people were not free to go to a church which would be canonical on the one hand, and on the other hand would be free from the influence from Russia. Therefore, I believe establishing a parallel jurisdiction, parallel canonical jurisdiction in Ukraine, is a solution to the issue of freedom of consciousness, which was given by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It has solved the issue effectively. The issue has been solved. That is very important. It has been solved also for those people, thousands of people who had to leave the Moscow Patriarchate after 2014 because they could not stand, they could not digest, either silence or words promulgated and uttered by the Russian Church or the Ukrainian Church of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. And they had either to leave altogether the church or to join other jurisdictions. And still they were tormented. Still it was a huge pastoral issue for them. Again, this issue has been solved. So it is a great relief for millions of Ukrainians, for their consciousness, a religious consciousness, for the issue of freedom of consciousness. And probably the last point that I wanted to raise, that while this issue, the decision of the Ecumenical Patriarchate has become a solution to consciousness of many in Ukraine, it became a problem to consciousness of many in Russia. So they are like corresponding vessels somehow. And indeed, many people in Russia perceived this decision of the Ecumenical Patriarchate as an insult against Russia. Well, it was not, I believe it was not an intention of the Ecumenical Patriarchate to insult anyone, but rather to give a solution to the existing problems. And the fact that the Russians were insulted was the problem of the Russians. It was not really the problem of the Ecumenical Patriarchate. It was not the intention of the church. And indeed, this caused tensions in the relations between Moscow and Constantinople, as you all know. I would offer my own interpretation to these tensions. Immediately after the decision of the Russian Church to break Eucharistic communion relations with the Ecumenical Patriarchate on October 15th, a couple of weeks ago, many interpreted this break as a schism, and many were feared that this schism would be a global schism, would be a global divide within the Orthodox community worldwide. I think it's not a schism, it's not a global divide. It's just a crack, as it were, or a rift in the relations between the churches, and actually it's a unilateral crack. I would say that it is, it's an imagined crack. It has been imagined by Russia, but it has not been agreed upon that there is a problem by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Other churches also failed or refused to recognize that there is a divide between the two churches. And we could speak about a global schism only in case if both sides of the conflict recognize that there is a conflict, that there is a break in relationship between the churches. And more importantly, if other churches recognize that this is there is a schism, and other churches would side with one or another church, would take either or one of those sides. None of the churches, even the faithful allies of Russia, took any side. The most dangerous probably point was when the Patriarch of Antioch visited recently Serbia and met the Patriarch of Serbia. Those are the two kind of traditional allies of Moscow. And even they did not produce any statement which would recognize a schism between the churches of Moscow and Constantinople. So if they refuse to recognize this reality, it means even if they fail to recognize this, it means that this schism does not exist as a reality. It is completely imagined. I would like to draw a parallel between the concept of imagined communities by Benedict Anderson when he described nationalism, that it is a completely imagined construct. This schism is a completely imagined construct. It exists only in the heads of a few people in the global orthodoxy. It is not shared by other people. The reality, the schism does not exist as reality, which brings us to my first point about recognition of reality. So if we recognize the reality, and when the churches globally recognize the reality that there is no schism, there will be no schism. It exists only in the imagination of the Russian church, as only in the imagination of the Russian church a civil war exists. So one delusion produces another delusion. A delusion about what is happening in Ukraine produces a delusion about what is happening between the churches in the global orthodoxy. The reality is, yes, there is a war in Ukraine. This reality has been recognized by the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and I think most Ukrainians are grateful to him and to the Patriarchate. And this recognition by the Ecumenical Patriarchate has not produced any split, any divide in the global orthodoxy. Those are two important realities that we need, I think, to bear in mind, and I'd like to emphasize those two realities in my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much for talking about the political aspect of it, and especially taking us into the depth of the questions of consciousness and the implications of this split between Moscow Patriarchate and now Kievan Patriarchate and the Ecumenical Church. And I wanted to kind of build on the last part of your presentation and ask Archbishop Evstrati. So all these processes that we have been observing after the fall of Soviet Union, they indicated this kind of split in the Orthodox Church in Baltic states, when part of the religious community were oriented toward Moscow Patriarchate, and part was independent. In Moldova, we have the same split when part of Moldovan Church is oriented toward Romania. The same situation in Georgia. So these processes were going for quite a long time, and some of those local churches actually applied for the same notion that Ukrainian Kiev Church did, but they were denied, and this is kind of the first major development in the post-Soviet history of Orthodox Church. So that's kind of one aspect that shows that there is this tendency of the processes, decentralized processes going in the Russian Orthodox Church. And another aspect which I actually didn't think about before Archimandrite Cyril mentioned it, this new notion that Moscow Patriarchate also started splitting from ecumenical church, and they even decided not to pray for them. There are these dramatic developments recently. So I was wondering, Archbishop Evstrati, what do you think about this decentralization and how it will reflect on the community, religious community, particularly in Ukraine? And also, could you reflect how it would affect different parts of Ukrainian community? The eastern part, which was more affected by Soviet atheism legacies, and western part, as you indicated, which was more Western oriented. And also, I was wondering, I wanted to ask a question, Archimandrite Cyril. You at one point indicated that you still belong to Moscow Patriarchate, identify with Moscow Patriarchate. So Archbishop Evstrati mentioned that kind of positively, that Moscow Patriarchate will exist in Ukraine, and so I was wondering, how do you feel the developments of Moscow Patriarchate in this new environment, rather probably hostile environment in Ukraine?
Father Kirill said about accepting reality, and what kind of structure now Moscow Patriarchate have. It's church empire or imperial church, and in 1990s in Russia, politicians and church officials openly enjoys that Communist Party, Gorbachev, lose Soviet Union, and Soviet Union was destroyed, but Russian Orthodox Church still exists, and this is a foundation for reconstruction, post-Soviet reconstruction and reunification post-Soviet space around Moscow as a third Rome, as a holy place, as a center of Russian world and Orthodox world. And in reality, returning to empire for Russia is impossible. They try, Putin and his entourage try to use, just to use this imperial ideas as a tool to hold a power in Russian Federation. In reality, I think most of them really understand that reconstruction of Russian Empire in modern world is impossible. But they try to use these ideas. Another very important point, I have no idea, do you know or not, that after World War II, Stalin's regime tried with incorporation with Moscow Patriarchate, re-establish it 75 years ago, in 1943. Tried to gather 8 ecumenical council. In Orthodox tradition, we recognize only 7 ecumenical councils, and last one was in 787. And Stalin and Moscow Patriarchy tried to prepare 8th Ecumenical Council in Moscow with main goal to proclaim Moscow Patriarch as ecumenical patriarchate, first among equal patriarch. It's a real story with many proofs and documents, and from that time until now, world Orthodoxy divided, really divided. One part support ecumenical patriarch as a real leader of modern real Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy oriented on values of freedom, of dignity, human dignity, and so on. And other part tried to re-establish medieval orthodoxy, imperial orthodoxy, and ideas of orthodox re-establishment of Orthodox empire, or reconstruction of new Byzantine empire around Moscow. And ground for these ideas inside Moscow Patriarchate is that the Moscow Patriarchate, one, is bigger than all other 13 mutually recognized churches on one Moscow Patriarchate by number of believers, churches, and entire network. But near 40% of structure of Moscow Patriarchate exists in Ukraine under jurisdiction of Russian Orthodox Church. Without Ukraine, Moscow Patriarchate will be big but not superpower church and lose ground for such global imperial ideas. You remember meeting between Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill in Havana. And Patriarch Kirill, just one of primates of Orthodox local Orthodox churches, he tried to play a role, someone comparable with Pope of Rome, like a leader of global Orthodoxy, and said, we Pope of Rome and me, we have global we have global responsibility. We two leaders, we have global responsibility, and so on. And conflicts you mentioned, and splits you mentioned, in Moldova, in Estonia, in Georgia, it's a part of process of decentralization, of deconstruction of empire. But these examples are not danger for main idea, because without Moldova, without Estonia, without Abkhazia or Ossetia, Russian empire, Russian imperial idea may live and may go forward. But without Ukraine, without Church of Ukraine, without Ukrainian history, re-establishment of Russian empire is impossible. And last one point, that Russian imperial idea based on such imagine that Moscow is a third Rome and a real success, successor of Byzantine heritage, successor of Byzantine heritage. But Kievan history, Kievan church is only one link, real link between Byzantine heritage, Byzantine tradition, Byzantine history and Moscow history. Without this link, Moscow statehood history starts from Ivan Kalita and Metropolitan Peter, from first years of 14th century, from a time of Holden Horde and so on. And one of main symbols of Russian heritage, hat of Monomach, Шапка Мономаха. And somebody mentioned about images of Great Prince Volodymyr, Russian tradition of image of Great Prince Volodymyr. Head of Monomach, it's a idea. It's a symbol of idea that Emperor Constantine Monomach of Byzantine Empire, as a symbol of transition of the power, grant this hat, this crown, to his grandson Volodymyr Monomach, Great Prince of Kiev, and Grand Prince of Kiev grants this symbol to Moscow princess. And this is a visible symbol of transition of history. But in reality, this is a hat given by Mongol Tatar Khan to Ivan Kalita as a symbol of his power over Moscow Principality. And without Kiev, without Kievan history, Russian imperial idea impossible, and maybe Russia, when lose these images, he find a strange, find a spirit to re-establish their statehood, their society model, not and go forward with face forward, not backward. Thank you.
Thanks. You always kind of bring it to positive ending. Thanks for that. And the question to my question to Archimandrite Cyril was about the future of Moscow Patriarchate, but I was wondering if you could cover it less from political point, but from the point why would Ukrainians want to stay with Moscow Patriarchate, and how, what impact now Moscow Patriarchate would have in Ukraine?
Well, I'll try to be brief. First of all, yes, there will be Ukrainians, quite a few of them, millions, I would say, who would stay with the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. This is another reality that we need to recognize, and it's good if we recognize this reality. Why they will stay there is difficult to say, because everyone will have his or her own reason. Probably one of the reasons will be the proximity, cultural proximity to Russia. For many of them were formed spiritually in the framework of the Russian spirituality. For some, it will be the Russian propaganda, which has already begun acting on them and explaining why they should stay in the Moscow Patriarchate, because they say it is the only right faith, that version of Orthodoxy, edition of Orthodoxy that has remained. Different reasons, right and wrong reasons, will keep them there. Nevertheless, I believe that it is important that the Moscow Patriarchate will stay in Ukraine, and not just for the sake of the Moscow Patriarchate. I will say now maybe a heretical point of view, very unorthodox. You may condemn me if you want. We have a conciliar kind of form here. But my heretical point is that it is good to have alternative canonical jurisdictions in one country. We have a custom in the Orthodox Church that one country should have only one church. And it is, we believe that it is an ancient, almost sacrosanct, divine apostolic tradition, which is wrong. Because in the period of Christian antiquity, there was only one state, the Roman Empire, and there were several churches which existed within the same Roman milieu. And with the emergence of the modern states, they adopted this idea that one state should have one church. It is a modern idea. It's not actually, traditional apostolic whatsoever. It is an idea which was inspired by the modernity. And now we are challenged by this idea. Many people in Ukraine still believe that Ukraine should have only one church. Probably should, but it will not have it. Let us be realistic. Let us face this reality. There will be at least two churches. And I think instead of just, humbly accepting this, we should celebrate this idea of having two parallel jurisdictions, because it will contribute to diversity in Ukraine, and it will help both churches to be better churches, if I may say this. Well, I will say something that probably Archbishop Evstrati will not like, but I think that both churches, Moscow Patriarchate and Kiev Patriarchate, they are not very different from one another. Well, I know you will disagree with me. They are quite similar, and there is no chance that they will change by themselves. It's like, this famous German fictional figure, Baron Münchhausen, who tried to draw himself out of marsh by his heirs. It's impossible. Only the coexistence of two churches may help those churches to be better, to improve, because there will be sort of competition between them. I hope there will be no war between them. That will be a very bad scenario. The good scenario will be a coexistence of two parallel jurisdictions which will compete one another, which will in this way help one another to be in shape and to become authoritarian structures. Because if you have competition, you cannot become authoritarian, because then otherwise priests and parishes would switch to another jurisdiction, and this will keep those churches in good shape. Therefore, I believe it will contribute to the diversity of Ukraine, general diversity of Ukraine. It will contribute certainly to the general tolerance, religious tolerance in Ukraine. It will help when the Orthodox eventually will learn to respect one another, other Orthodox. They will also learn how to respect other Christians. Therefore, I believe this configuration, even though it is not probably the optimal configuration, but eventually it may contribute to a better tolerance, to a better freedom of religion in Ukraine, if I may say this. So it's a win-win situation.
Well, thank you very much. Both of our presenters kind of painted very optimistic picture, but maybe our audience will bring some negative sides on it. So please identify yourself and keep your comment or question under 1 minute. And I also will ask our panelists to keep your answer to 2 minutes. And then we will have 2 rounds of questions, please.
Our commander, Cyril, was talking about accepting reality. Well, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Kiev and Patriarchate did not accept reality for the last 20 years. And today they stand on the threshold of what they dreamed of. It wasn't reality for 20 years, it was a dream. I doubt that Moscow will just accept the reality of their loss, and I think they're going to spend a lot of energy and waste a lot of money and spend a lot of energy on trying to recover and somehow change the situation because there's so much stake. I would like to hear your comment on that.
Okay. Let's collect several questions, please.
Austin Doler, Center for European Policy Analysis. Now, earlier you both touched on the idea of freedom for an Russophilic Ukrainian church wouldn't just mean freedom from Moscow, but also freedom from the Ukrainian government as well. Now, what concrete steps would an Russophilic Ukrainian church have to do in order to not become wedded to the Ukrainian government and become just an arm of soft power like we're seeing the Moscow church acts for Putin's regime? Thank you.
Okay, and question.
Thank you. My name is Nicholas Soy, Director of the Orthodox Peace Fellowship. I really appreciated your comment, Father Cyril, about the imagined schism. I'm getting emails all the time since October 15th of people saying, what do I do now? Can I go to a Greek Orthodox church anymore? And I'm wondering if you could project forward into the future the possibilities of a regularization of relations between Moscow and Constantinople. What would that involve? Or will this end up just being an outstanding issue the way Jerusalem and Antioch schism is? Or is there another possibility?
Okay, thank you. So let's this time go with
I will start. Thank you. I will start with the last question. I don't know what needs to be done in order to normalize the relations between the two churches. It's going to be. I think it's going to be a long-lasting issue. It's going to be a long-lasting fantasy, I would say. How to dissipate this fantasy, I don't know really. But it has to do with the second question about the. With the first question about the accepting reality. I think. Well, the reality for Moscow is it's not losing anything. Nothing has happened to Russia. I mean, who has interfered to the Russian soil? Who has infringed on the Russian sovereignty, whatever? No, nothing happened. Nothing like that has happened. It was an insult to the imagination, to the Russian imagination. But it was a political imagination. It was not an ecclesial imagination. It was not their image about the church. It was their image about their ideological standing. Therefore, this step of Constantinople, I believe, is not a loss for Russia. It is a gain for Russia, because it gives Russia a chance to realize the reality of the church, that the church has remained intact. The church has not been split. Many more people in Ukraine joined the global Orthodox Church. Everyone should be happy about that, not to be complaining all the time. It's an opportunity to celebrate, and that is the reality which should be celebrated. Therefore, it is a gain for the Russian Church, not a loss. And regarding the freedom of the Ukrainian Church from the Ukrainian state, I think the competition of the two churches, all of them are similar in the sense that they tend to collaborate with the state, because they are the churches of the Byzantine tradition, and the Byzantine symphony is pretty much in the DNA of every single Byzantine church. And this applies to the Kiev Patriarchate, to the Moscow Patriarchate, to any other patriarchate you can imagine. Only the coexistence of two churches can secure somehow that no one will have monopoly on symphony with the state, and the state will not have an established church in UK, because there will be two churches, and you cannot have two established churches.
Thanks. And please.
Kievan Patriarchate rise up from very beginning, stood on the ground of support from the people, not from the state. Russia and Moscow Patriarchate try to describe that creation of Kievan Patriarchate is a political project. But in reality, Ukrainian state never support Kievan Patriarchate, just maybe at the time of President Yushchenko in many words, but very few symbolic deeds. And at the time of Euromaidan and crisis in Ukraine, our church have power inside ourselves to stay with the people, not with government, because we know that people support us. And future of our church depends not to the state or government, but depends on people. When people will support us, we will exist in the future. About your question, in what time it will be finished, I would like to remind a very interesting story. After World War II, in Moscow was raised the question of attitude to ecumenical movement. And officially Moscow Patriarchate have a strong statement and attitude that ecumenical moving is just an imperial tool, is a heresy, and so on and so on. And Russian Orthodox Church don't participate in this movement at all. It was just after World War II. At the time of Second Vatican, when Soviet government saw how important role played Roman Catholic Church in global West and ecumenical movement, Protestant churches in United States, government changed their mind and grant possibility to Russian Orthodox Church to be a part of ecumenical movement. And in 1960s, 1970s, Russian Orthodox Church started to be a main part of ecumenical movement. Just after 15 or 20 years, when they are totally denied this option. I think after change in Kremlin, change of mind or change of person, this schism in mind will end, I hope.
Thanks. Maybe one more question to, well, gentleman over there. Yeah.
A number of times...
Could you introduce yourself?
Cyril Kennedy. I'm a doctoral student from Catholic University of America. A number of times, the former Metropolitan of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate, Vladimir Sabodan, has been mentioned and contrasted to the current Metropolitan Onufri. And so I'd ask either a question about that, the difference between those personalities and perhaps what they represent, or put somewhat differently, why was there this moral failure in the MP in Ukraine to respond to the needs of the Ukrainian people? What's the root cause of that? Thank you.
Let's go in the same direction again, and please, Archimandrite Cyril.
Well, I will not judge the personalities. I just deliberately avoid it. I just want to say that probably one of the reasons is a wrongly perceived spirituality. It's a sort of spirituality that distances itself from the reality. It despises political realities, and it gives a way to very wrong political realities in this way. That is the explanation of the behavior of the Ukrainian church nowadays vis-a-vis the conflict in Ukraine. People pretend they try to, to live in a different world, which is completely imagined, and they perceive this world as spiritual, the world of spirits, which has nothing to do with the real life of people, and this is wrong, and that is the reason of failure, I believe.
Late Metropolitan Volodymyr, as you know, took many official positions, church positions in Russian Orthodox Church with big responsibility. He was like a chancellor of Moscow Patriarchate. Before this, he was exarch of Western Europe. He was for 10 years he was rector of Moscow Academy. He was a representative of Moscow Patriarchate to World Council of Churches in Geneva, and he have big experience, and he knows much clearer that real world is much complicated than a simple picture. And Metropolitan Onufry, described by his supporters or those who criticize him like a monk. He is a real monk with huge obedience to his spiritual father. And it maybe, I think it's very good for monks, but it's a problem and lack of his own will. It's a problem for primate of church, who must decide himself, not have obedience for anybody, but decide himself and have responsibility himself. I think it's a problem, it's a difference between these two hierarchies. Thanks.
Well, this panel kind of showed that the diversity in Ukraine and these differences between different congregations, they only contribute, in the view of our panelists, to the religious freedom there, and that leaves us hope. And maybe the next panel, which is about defending religious freedom, will build on the ideas that our presenters developed, and please join me in giving them a round of applause.